You're embarrassing this family. That's what my dad said as I sat across from him, surrounded by a dozen relatives, at our so-called emergency family meeting. My startup was bleeding money. My apartment lease was ending, and I had exactly $127 in my checking account. They wanted me to quit, give up on the medical platform I'd spent years building, and apply for a real job, like my older sister, the lawyer everyone worshipped. But just when I thought everything was collapsing, a call from a small hospital in Nebraska changed everything. They used my tech to save a 10-year-old boy's life. Stick around, because what started as a desperate gamble ended up saving lives across the world, and proved that even in failure there can be a blueprint for revolution. I was the disappointment of a family that only believed in one kind of success: predictable, prestigious, and profitable. While my sister climbed the legal ladder with Ivy League polish and courtroom charm, I dove into the chaos of medical tech, chasing something different, something uncertain. After graduating from Stanford and working at a leading Silicon Valley firm, I walked away from it all to build a startup. Nobody asked for a platform to connect patients with ultra-rare conditions to clinical trials around the world. It wasn't glamorous. It wasn't profitable. And as far as my family was concerned, it wasn't sane. But I'd seen too many stories of families spending years searching for answers, only to find them too late. I wanted to fix that, even if it meant risking everything, even if it meant doing it alone. I wasn't supposed to be the rebel. I followed the rules. I got the grades. I got into Stanford, interned at the right places, smiled at the right networking events. But the truth is, I never really belonged to that world of polished ambition and LinkedIn-ready success stories. In my family, though, that world was the only one that mattered. My parents didn't just love my older sister Claire. They worshipped her. She was everything they dreamed of: a Harvard law graduate partner track at a top firm, by 30 clean-cut fiancé, perfectly timed wedding. Every family dinner ended with a new story about how Claire negotiated that big case, or how Claire was invited to speak at another conference. Meanwhile, I'd be at the other end of the table, trying to explain machine learning algorithms for rare disease classification to people who thought coding was just playing on the computer. After 2 years at a respected biotech company in San Francisco, I quit to build something I couldn't stop thinking about. A platform that used AI to match rare disease patients to relevant clinical trials. It started with a personal story. A friend of mine lost his little sister to a rare genetic disorder, not because there was no treatment, but because they found the right one too late. That broke me, and it planted a question I couldn't shake. What if time didn't have to run out? So I started sketching out the idea. Nights, weekends, then full-time. I poured my savings into the first prototype and convinced a handful of researchers to give me access to de-identified clinical trial metadata. At first, I wasn't alone. My partner at the time, someone I deeply trusted, believed in it too. They helped with the business side, supported the crazy hours, until the funding dried up. When we hit our first major roadblock, a grant rejection that meant missing payroll, they were gone. Just like that. The day they left, I sat on the floor of my shared apartment surrounded by whiteboards and wires, wondering if maybe my parents were right. Maybe this was just a delusion. And speaking of my parents, they weren't exactly subtle about their thoughts. You had a 6-figure salary, stock options, health insurance, and you threw it away for a fantasy. That was my mom. Startups are for people who can afford to fail. You're not one of them. That was my dad. It didn't matter that I showed them real case studies. Didn't matter that I met with medical professionals who said, this could change the way we treat rare conditions. None of it mattered. Because what they saw was not progress. What they saw was someone falling behind. Claire bought a house. I borrowed money from a friend to pay rent. Claire made it to Forbes 30 Under 30. I couldn't even get a response from most investors. Every family gathering turned into a minefield of passive-aggressive comments. Still working on that project. Oh, I thought that app thing was just temporary. You know the government hires health analysts very stable. At one point, I tried to tell them about a breakthrough. We had our first user successfully matched to a trial in Germany, a child with a mitochondrial condition. Before I could finish the story, my uncle interrupted, so, no revenue yet, right? The thing they didn't understand, and maybe never would, is that I wasn't building this to make millions. I was building this because I had to. Because no one else was. Because in the world of rare diseases, every day without a diagnosis is a day closer to irreversible damage. I couldn't look away from that. But I was running out of time. The servers weren't cheap. The outreach campaigns weren't working. And slowly, my hope started to fade. I tried hiding the panic, but it crept in. Every morning I'd check my inbox hoping for a miracle, and usually finding only bounced investor replies or requests for traction metrics I didn't have. That's when my family called the meeting. 12 of them sitting in a living room with folded arms and polite frowns, telling me it was time to let go. That I was embarrassing the family name. That I needed to stop pretending I was some kind of hero. They had no idea how much it took to not scream at them, how much I'd already lost, how close I was to giving up. But just as I was ready to sign the papers to dissolve the company, that was the moment the call came in. A soft Midwest accent, a doctor from a hospital I'd never heard of, and 5 words that didn't sound real at first. Your software saved a life. I didn't believe it at first. Wait, can you say that again? I asked, gripping my phone with both hands. The voice on the other end belonged to Dr. Harris, a pediatrician, from a small regional hospital in Nebraska. He told me they had a 10-year-old patient, a boy with recurring seizures, chronic fatigue, and organ inflammation no one could explain. Dozens of tests. No answers. Parents, desperate. Doctors, out of ideas. Until one of their team members, almost as a last resort, tried our platform. He said, "We uploaded his symptom profile and genome markers, and your system matched him to a clinical trial for a gene therapy in Boston. It was closing enrollment in 3 days. They got him in. The kid had already received the first dose. His inflammation markers were dropping. His seizures had stopped. His parents, crying in the hallway, said it was the first time in months he'd slept through the night. And here's what shook me. Without your tool, we wouldn't have found the trial in time. We wouldn't have found it at all. That call didn't just save the company. It saved me. Because for the first time in months, maybe years, I had proof. Not a pitch deck. Not projections. Real, living, breathing proof that what I built mattered. And in that moment, everything inside me flipped. The doubt, the shame, the guilt. All of it gave way to something I hadn't felt in a long time. Conviction. I called the one team member who hadn't quit when the money dried up, an epidemiologist named Ravi who'd been volunteering his time on weekends. We stayed up all night reviewing the Nebraska case. We combed through our records and realized something. There were 6 more patients who had successfully enrolled in rare disease trials thanks to our software, but we hadn't been tracking outcomes. We just didn't have the bandwidth. But now, we had a narrative. Not just an idea, not just a prototype impact. So, we got to work. Ravi reached out to contacts in public health departments and smaller hospitals we'd onboarded during our pilot phase. I started compiling real-world evidence of matches, timelines, response rates. Even if the sample size was small, the stories were powerful. And then came the decision. Instead of begging random investors who didn't get what we were doing, we'd aim higher. We'd pitch the one kind of stakeholder who actually had to care about impact global health organizations. We put together a report highlighting 7 patient cases from 5 different countries. We showed how our software reduced diagnosis time by 70% on average in those cases. How lives were being saved. Not hypothetically, but now. We sent it to everyone who Doctors Without Borders, the CDC, the European Medicines Agency. Most didn't reply. Some gave us auto-generated thank you emails. But one didn't. 2 weeks later, I got an email from an assistant at the Global Rare Disease Alliance, a consortium I'd never even heard of connected to the WHO. They asked for a call. I almost didn't believe it. When we spoke, they told me they'd seen too many projects pitch solutions that had no data, no staying power, just buzzwords. But our case study... It made people cry in the meeting room, the program lead said. They invited me to present the platform at their annual closed-door summit in Geneva, an invite-only event where international health leaders discussed resource allocation for rare and neglected diseases. This wasn't just a break. This was a spotlight, the kind you don't get twice. I had less than a week to prepare. I borrowed money for the flight. I crammed months of impact data into a 10-minute presentation, and then I walked into a marble hall full of people in suits and earpieces, feeling like a total fraud. But when I spoke, I didn't talk about algorithms. I didn't even lead with tech. I told them about the boy in Nebraska, about how his parents thought they were going to lose him, about how our platform wasn't designed to make money, it was designed to make time matter less deadly. After the presentation, there was silence. Then one person clapped. Then another. And another. By the end, I had 7 organizations asking for meetings, including 2 international research funds, a medical AI coalition, and a public-private alliance that funded global health startups. One of them slid me a card. They wanted to discuss a long-term partnership, a joint effort to scale our system to 40-plus countries. They were ready to talk numbers. Real ones. 9 digits. The invitation to present at Geneva hadn't even cooled off in my inbox when the call came. Come home. Now. We need to talk. It was my mother's voice, Sharp, controlled. The kind of tone she reserved for emergencies or deep embarrassment. I knew that tone well. When I arrived, the living room was already full. My dad, my aunt, and uncle, my cousins, even my sister, the lawyer, the golden child, flew in from New York. They called it a family meeting, but it felt like an ambush. My dad was the first to speak. "We're worried about you." Then my uncle chimed in. "You've had a good run, but let's be honest. How long can you chase something that's clearly not working?" I stayed quiet. Then my mom said it. "You've become a burden, not just to us, to yourself." A burden. That word sliced through me. They brought up my past salaries, the stability I gave up, the dreams I supposedly threw away. They brought up my ex, how they weren't surprised the relationship ended. They even suggested I apply for a government job, something respectable. Then my sister leaned forward. "We're not saying give up. Just stop pretending this is still something real. Still something real." I wanted to scream. Not because they doubted me, but because in some twisted way, I had expected it. I'd lived in their shadow for so long, I had memorized its shape. But that day, I couldn't take it anymore. I stood up. "Do you even want to know what I've built? What it's doing for people you'll never meet in places you'll never go?" They stayed silent. 7 patients. 7 lives. And more coming. They rolled their eyes. "You think you're saving the world," my cousin muttered. "But all you're doing is delaying the inevitable." I almost walked out. But then, my phone buzzed. I didn't check it. Not in front of them. I needed to leave with some dignity, whatever I had left. I drove to a nearby gas station, sat in my car, and finally looked at the notification. Subject line: Invitation to Collaborate, Global Therapeutic Access Initiative. From World Health Organization. My hands started shaking. I opened the email. They wanted to formalize a multi-phase partnership. Initial pilot in 10 countries. Funding of up to $300 million over 5 years. Contingent on impact benchmarks. They also wanted me personally to present at their high-level assembly in Geneva the following month, in front of health ministers and policymakers from over 100 nations. This was it. The very thing I had been mocked for chasing, dismissed, belittled, laughed at, had just become the centerpiece of a global health strategy. And yet, all I could think about was that room. The condescending glances, the forced smiles, the word burden. That night, I didn't sleep. I didn't celebrate. I just sat in silence, watching my phone screen glow, reading and rereading the offer, afraid it would disappear if I blinked too hard. The next morning, I forwarded the email to my team, the 3 people who still believed in the project. Within hours, they were on calls with WHO liaisons, drafting framework proposals, translating our tech into regulatory language. We weren't just pitching anymore. We were negotiating. But I knew something else was coming. Control. If we accepted full funding, we risked losing the original purpose of the platform to match patients with trials based on need-not profitability. Investors would want outcomes, timelines, monetization. And I wasn't ready to trade lives for shareholder value. That's when I got a surprise message. It was from my sister. Just 3 words. Can we talk? We met at a small cafe awkwardly, like two coworkers forced into small talk. She didn't apologize for what she said, but she didn't defend it either. She just asked one thing. Do you want help structuring the deal? Because if you don't protect yourself now, they'll take it from you. That's when I realized she wasn't there to save me. She was there because she finally saw me. Not the rebel. Not the disappointment. Not the burden. But the builder. We spent the next week drafting terms. A licensing model, not an acquisition. Data sovereignty clauses, an independent ethics committee to approve patient matching protocols. I brought it all to the next negotiation. The WHO team was impressed not just with the tech, but with the clarity of vision. They agreed to every clause. They didn't want to own it. They wanted to amplify it. And for the first time since I started this journey, I felt what I hadn't dared to feel before Pride. I walked into that conference room in Geneva, not as a dreamer, not as a founder, but as a translator of lives. The space was massive. Marble floors, curved rows of delegates, wearing headsets, walls, lined with world flags. My name was listed on the program under Innovative Pathways for Rare Disease Access. But for me, it wasn't about innovation anymore. It was about redemption, not from failure, but from forgetting why I started in the first place. I opened with a story about a boy named Eli, 10 years old, diagnosed with a gene mutation so rare only 6 cases had ever been documented. No treatment, no trial access. Until a rural doctor stumbled across our platform. That story, and dozens like it, had become our new proof of concept. Not just data points. Lives saved. When I finished, the room stayed silent for 2 full seconds. Then the applause came. Heavy. Sustained. But applause doesn't build systems. So, I got to work. The proposal on the table. A $300 million partnership distributed across 3 phases, with our platform at the core of matching patients in underserved regions to clinical trials and early access therapies. But I'd already seen what that money could do to people. Startups who once swore to change the world, suddenly optimizing for ad revenue and exit strategies. I didn't want to become another cautionary tale. So, I said something they didn't expect. I don't want to sell. The room blinked. I want to share. I want control over how this platform grows. I want patient ethics at the center. I want tech that answers to care, not capital. The WHO team looked surprised, but they didn't resist. In fact, one of the directors nodded and said, "We've been waiting for someone to say that." That's when I knew I wasn't crazy. We finalized the structure. Over the next few weeks, controlled licensing, not acquisition. Equity-free, funding for infrastructure growth. Global data. Commons agreements that protected patient information, a rotating clinical review board to keep trials aligned with ethics and access, not just market viability, but the most surreal part. Every one of those documents had my name at the top. Not my sister's. She ain't my father's. Not a lawyer from Silicon Valley. Mine. For the first time, I wasn't just proving myself to others. I was building something on my own terms. My sister, who had quietly reviewed every legal clause without asking for credit, sent me one text after the final signatures. "You did good. Really good." We didn't need to say more. Meanwhile, the platform began scaling in ways we never imagined. We opened new data hubs, translated the interface into 12 languages, trained doctors in Kenya, Vietnam, Peru, guiding them to use the system not as outsiders, but as co-developers. And slowly, the inbox changed. Instead of complaints or investor warnings, I got stories. A mother in Jordan who got her daughter into a gene therapy trial. A teenager in Canada matched within hours to a Japanese biotech pilot. A rural nurse in Ghana who became the point person for rare disease triage in her district. Every message reminded me we weren't building a product. We were building a possibility. And yet, not everyone celebrated. One major U.S. funder accused me of leaving money on the table. Another tech founder called me naive in a podcast. "Nonprofit mindset will kill you," he said. Maybe. But I wasn't here to become a billionaire. I was here because I remembered what it felt like to be in that living room surrounded by people who measured worth in salaries and status. And I swore I'd never define myself that way again. I wasn't chasing approval anymore. I wasn't even chasing success. I was following the lives. And those lives were waiting. 6 months after that deal, we weren't a struggling startup anymore. We were a global movement. 50 full-time team members. 4 regional headquarters. Dozens of remote collaborators from universities, hospitals, and nonprofits. What started as a side project in my garage had now become a platform serving over 30,000 patients across 41 countries. We built something no algorithm alone could do trust. Among patients, doctors, regulators, even families. There were days I cried reading the messages that came in. One from a pediatrician in Chile. We used to tell these parents, "There's nothing we can do." Now we say, "Let's try." Another, from a mother in Turkey. "Your platform didn't just save my daughter. It saved my belief in science." But for all the lives we reached, there was still one audience I wasn't sure I'd ever reach. My family. They watched from the sidelines, silent, unsure what to make of this version of me. Not a failure. Not a doctor. Something else. One evening after a long week of travel and meetings, I came home to find a large envelope waiting. No return address. Just my name. Inside was a handwritten letter. From my dad. "I still don't understand everything you do. But I saw your interview last week, the part where you said, 'Success should be measured in lives touched, not in titles earned.' That stuck with me. I'm sorry we didn't see your vision sooner. We were scared. Not for you, but for what your failure might mean about us. You've shown us something better than pride. You've shown us purpose." I sat with that letter for a long time. It didn't erase the years of pressure, didn't undo the wounds, but it was a beginning. Weeks later, at a family dinner, one I used to dread, my aunt asked me the question that once would have stung, so, "What exactly do you do again?" But this time I smiled, and I told her the truth. I connect people who've been forgotten to people who never stopped looking for a way to help. They listened, really listened. No interruptions, no eye rolls, just silence, the kind that means they finally see you. I didn't need applause. I didn't need apologies, because by then I knew something deeper. I didn't need them to admit I was right. I just needed to stop believing I was wrong. In a world that measures success by how loud your victories are, I learned to listen to the quiet ones. The breath of a child waking up after surgery. The email that says we found a match. The look in a doctor's eyes when they realize they're not alone. Those are the metrics I live by now. My name may never be carved into a hospital wing, but it's coded into every trial that never would have happened. Into every patient who got one more day. Into the silence my family now fills with respect, not pity. And if you're out there building something the world doesn't understand, if you're being told to quit, to be reasonable, to shrink down so others feel taller, king. Because sometimes when the world shuts the door, it's not rejection, it's redirection. And the next voice you hear might just be the one that saves everything.